Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this live Q&A sessions. Cédric, so glad to have you back here. You're joining us live from Thailand today.
Anytime. Yeah, glad to be back. And yes, here, unfortunately, the sun just set. It's 6 p.m. And that's why it looks like it's in the middle of the night here.
But it's not. So we're glad we're not messing up with your sleep schedule. So I want to jump right into this first topic, basically from Switzerland to Thailand. You'll be living there with your family until the end of the year. So first of all, when did you actually get there and why did you decide to move to Thailand?
Yeah, we came here 3 weeks ago, pretty much to the day. So it feels like we've definitely settled in by now. And why? One answer is why not? The other answer is both Elena, myself, and Lana were not the biggest fans of cold places, and Switzerland is about to get cold. And then also, you know that I've always had a bit of a nomadic life, and I believe that travel is the best education you can get. And so we figured, why not see if we can still live that life with Lana now? And so far, we're not regretting it a single second.
And how do you actually experience it? You know, with the experience, the learning in life through traveling. What did you learn or take away so far from that trip?
Yeah, I mean, for Elena and me, I think it's we can consciously perceive the culture. We can interact with locals and get an understanding of like how COVID has hit them, how they deal with it, and all of that. And I think for Lana, so this week was her first week at daycare. So she's going to a daycare with about 10 other kids from all over the world, which has been an interesting experience because we realized that before this, she mainly the other kids that she met were Swiss kids and they all kind of looked the same. And now being in this group of 10 kids that all have different qualities and all look a bit different, have different ages. The first day, I think, was very intense for her. And it continues to be intense because every noon I pick her up and bring her home, and usually she falls asleep on the scooter ride. But she, I think she's already made like first friends, even though obviously she's probably not going to remember them later in life. But it's cool to see her interact with kids from all over the world and figure out how to communicate with them.
Yeah, amazing. And the whole discussion, to move to Thailand or to move out of Switzerland, was that a very clear and easy decision for you and Elena and also Lana? Or was it also a more difficult thing to navigate through due to COVID and also due to the more settled lifestyle that you now have, because you even have your own house nowadays? You're not homeless anymore, so to speak.
Yeah, so lots of questions. So, well, first, easiest one to answer, Lana was not really involved in the decision process.
but still affected, right?
Right, yeah. But I mean, we just celebrated her first birthday like a few days before we left for Thailand. The conversation with Elena was very long and we had lots of pros and cons, and probably took us like 3 weeks to make a decision. No, I mean, I asked her, hey, would you like to go to Thailand for a few months? And she said yes, and that's how we made the decision.
So very simple.
Yeah. In terms of what COVID is like and how it made our travel a bit more complicated, yes. I mean, pre-COVID, we didn't, like Swiss citizens typically don't need to get a visa, a tourist visa to come to Thailand. So we actually had to go to the embassy, lots of documents to fill out. And I would also say, it's kind of hard to assemble the information of what is actually needed. Luckily, I have someone on my team that helped me with that. But overall, it all worked out in the end. But it did take a bit of preparation. And then this weekend, I have 2 colleagues from my team arriving as well. They're going to join me here and work from here with me for a few weeks. And one of them couldn't board his flight on Tuesday because Thailand just changed like an IT system for one of the certificates that you need to get into the country, and so he ended up at the gate not being able to board.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah. So overall, yes, it is an extra effort. On the flip side, I can already tell how things are easing in right now, because as of November 1st, you don't need a visa anymore. You don't need to quarantine here. You just need a test on arrival. So Yeah, things definitely a good ROI in terms of if you're going for 3 months. If we had only come here for a week or two, I think maybe it would have been too much of an overhead to get all the documents and the visa. But given that we wanted to stay longer, it definitely paid off.
Nice. And I also wonder, what's from your perspective now, what you experienced so far, the greatest advantage of spending some time away from Switzerland, despite the warmer temperature, I guess?
Yeah, so definitely on the weekends I get out and we go on little adventures. During the week I mostly work, and one of the biggest advantages that I usually have the mornings to myself, because we're 6 hours ahead of Switzerland. So between like my 6 a.m. and my noon, usually the rest of my team isn't up. And then the biggest disadvantage is also that because of the time difference, sometimes I would stay on and work till like 10, 11. I think last night my calls went till like midnight. So the work days have been quite long. But that's just a matter of like adjusting now. And I think that there's like this transitory period where I had already booked calls before we departed. And I think from next week on, it's looking better.
How is it to work from there? I mean, you've always worked from all over the world all the time, so that doesn't seem to be a big challenge for you. But now with the time difference and also the projects that you are involved in, do you feel any difference from being around your team in Switzerland, or is that not a big change for you at all?
So first, one thing I want to say, even though we had some problems at the beginning of this, before we went live, the internet here is really good. And that's one of the key ingredients, I feel, in order to stay productive and connect with others in your team, but also from all over. In terms of how it's changed my work, I mean, even when we are all in Switzerland, we would most often only see each other maybe once a week, if even. Plus some other, I mean, I feel like travel is ramping up again. There's been a few conferences, so it's not like I had the team around me the whole time. Plus someone from our team is traveling to the US this week. So we're basically, we realized yesterday with just 5 people, we now offer like 24/7 coverage, 20 founders. So if there's any founders watching that want to get in touch with us at any time of the day, we can now offer 24/7 coverage. But on the flip side, I'm actually looking forward to having 2 people from my team join me this weekend, and then they're going to be here for 4 or 5 weeks. We've rented a big, nice house and are going to enjoy island life together, along with probably very productive days.
Yeah, amazing. I also see some people joined Utah. Adrian, Marco, welcome. If any of you has any questions for Cédric, please post them in the comments. Happy to address them and ask him your questions. I also wonder, yeah, of course. Whoever you want to ask something, post the questions in the chat. I also wonder, do you have anything that you miss from Switzerland, that you maybe were or were not aware of before, but now you miss it and it's not that cool to be away from it?
No, it's just people. Today's my mom's birthday. Happy birthday, Mom. But we caught up via FaceTime earlier, and we had a lot of time before we left, and we're actually going to go on a trip to. So the next destination that Elena, Lana, and I are going to go to and spend quite a bit of time is Cape Town, beginning of January. So we're going to be there for a couple months, and we're going to bring my parents for a safari as well. And but let me get back on track. So if anything, it's people. In terms of like things, nothing. I mean, it's nice to be in our house, but we also enjoy like being. I mean, I have a pool right out my room here where I'm working, and I really enjoy just being able to jump into the pool and swim a few laps, sometimes 3-4 times a day, and to also, spend time. Lana loves the pool, so the 2 of us is kind of part of our bonding time is to quickly go for a swim every few hours.
Yeah, amazing. You mentioned South Africa as a next destination for January onwards. Is that setup, traveling to where the warm temperatures and the sun is that something that you could imagine doing with your family on a more regular basis in the future?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the life that Elena and I imagine, is being able, not necessarily always chase the sun, but spend it in new places where we feel we're going to enjoy the surroundings, and it gives Lana and us some new experiences. And then from time to time, we get to bring friends, colleagues, people from our team. Yeah, I mean, we're not set on anything. We're not forcing ourselves to do anything, but it feels right to be home for a few weeks and then move on to the next place, and then probably spend a bit more time home the second quarter of next year.
So what would be the ideal setup be for you in that regard? Like spending 2 to 3 months abroad, then maybe 1 quarter at home, then going abroad again? Or how do you imagine that for next year?
I think we're in this fortunate position where we have a lot of freedom and choice. So yes, one thing I don't want to do anymore is travel for like 1 or 2 days, especially if it's somewhere far. What I used to do in the past is like come to Thailand for like 5 days and then go to the US for 3 days and so forth. And
why don't you want to do that anymore?
well, back then I did it mostly because of conferences, because I was meeting people, because of the businesses and the ventures were all in different places. And now I've kind of designed the business side of things so that I can be anywhere. Plus, it's much easier to do that by myself. And when I was younger and jet lag didn't affect me as much, than now that I'm starting to be an old fart and I have a family that travels with me. I mean, it's not like even though I'm a bit of an aviation geek, it's not that I particularly enjoy being in a plane for 12, 15, whatever hours at a time. And also with Lana, I mean, the travel is a bit more intense. But she did really well. The trip over here to the island took us 20 hours, and she did surprisingly well. But still, I mean, also from like a carbon emission standpoint, it's just great to like go somewhere and then really immerse ourselves in the place, like live here, cook our own food, explore the surroundings instead of just hopping from one place to another.
Yeah, also giving yourself more time to really indulge in the local culture and really meeting people down there instead of going back and forth all the time. So yeah, that sounds like a nice new setup. I also wonder, in terms of disadvantages, what are some of the greatest disadvantages that you see in such a setup? One that I could obviously think of is, Switzerland is such, a nice country with a very good healthcare system and everything. That you basically, wherever you go, that you also do face a risk that in case of an emergency or something, that you will have a lower or a worse coverage health-wise, for example, than you would have here back home in Switzerland.
Yeah, so so it's a good point. 2 things that we do is in our research. Is look, does this place have a good medical facility? And in this case, both the islands that we're going to be on, so Koh Samui now and then Koh Phangan from next week on, they have hospitals with a good reputation. I have friends that have lived on one of the islands for, I think, just over 2 years now, and so that was part of the research. And the second thing is having health coverage or health insurance that covers these parts of the world, so that we never have to worry about that. And then maybe last point regarding that, I don't believe in optimizing life to kind of avoid these kind of pitfalls. I mean, accidents are going to happen anywhere. But I mean, I think if we were designing our lives to never be in a place that has less health coverage or lower quality health services than Switzerland, then we probably couldn't travel to a lot of places. I just believe in like taking calculated risks, and in this case, I'm not worried at all. I mean, there's like another, I don't know, 5,000-6,000 people on this island with us, so they need a hospital.
Nice.
Other disadvantages, I would say, of course, there is a bit of overhead, as every time you move from one place to another, you got to find a place to stay. You got to figure out which area you want to stay in. You got to figure out how you can be productive, get a local SIM card, all of that stuff. but it's also an opportunity to reconnect with friends that I haven't seen in a long time, or to chat with people and like acquaintances and friends in my network, and figure out like what is it that they like about this place, because they've either lived here for a while, or they've recently traveled here. So I guess it's a downside I'm willing to take for the occasional trip somewhere.
Yeah, it's always with everything in life, right? There's not only pros, there are also cons in everything. So it's really figuring out, are you willing to accept the cons? Is that the pros that you get, is that a good trade-off for the cons that you also get with that in return? You mentioned also South Africa. I also wonder, are there any other destinations that you look at that are on your list of interest? Anything that you want to share there?
Yeah, it's probably harder to. It's probably easier to say where I don't want to go, because I mean, we imagine this life that's like very diverse. You know, one quarter we live on this island, and maybe the next quarter we go somewhere in the middle of the city, live in Manhattan for 3 months, then go to like the countryside in Portugal and live on a farm for 3 months, and kind of really experience where food comes from. Then go to like a very rural place in Russia and experience how that is, and the problems and challenges that come with that. That's what I mean by like travel can be a really good source of education, is if you allow that diversity and you're not afraid to switch it up, and you're not looking to just always stay in the same comfortable like 5-star hotel. I think that those are the experiences that Elena and I are looking for. And so yeah, the list is very long, and we don't make plans for more than the next, like usually, I mean, I can't even say usually, right? But right now we're making plans for the next stop after this one. Then I know we're going to be back in Switzerland for a bit, and then we'll see what happens.
Yeah, not usually yet, you mean? That's going to change soon.
Well, I don't know. At which point can you call it usual? I was thinking about that earlier. Maybe after living this life for like 2 years, that's when people started to accept that I live without a home, or that I travel with just 64 things. It's like, it took like 2 years. Not that was a goal, but I just realized after like 2 years of living that lifestyle, it became easier for others to understand that is something that I am now doing. Whereas before, it just always seemed like, oh, that was an idea, or it's an experiment, and then who knows what's going to happen. And we might also make a negative, or we might go through a negative experience and say this is not for us, or that we will change our plans. So that's why I'm not saying.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, you're open, you focus on your own needs, and you see where it takes you. So I think that's a good starting point. Is there anything else that you would like to add on, the trip, the move to Thailand, or your thoughts on traveling and going to other places for a longer duration before we switch to the next topic on my list?
No, maybe just, I mean, I've asked you earlier if you wanted to join. I think it's also the reason I think these trips are most fun to experience is if you can experience them with other people that share a similar mindset. And so if you change your mind, or if there's anyone watching that feels like spending a couple of weeks in Copenhagen, I think we have a bedroom open for a few weeks, then just reach out to me.
Yeah, that's a good call to action. Make sure to comment or to reach out to Cédric directly. That's a unique offering that you can't refuse. So let's also move to the next topic. We also, of course, we know you're very big in the DeFi space. So we also want to address how to get started with DeFi. So first things first, why should I actually care about getting involved in DeFi at all?
Yeah, and maybe a disclaimer I want to make is that none of this is going to be any sort of advice. It's just I'm sharing my experience. And you said I'm big in DeFi, but I consider myself also someone that's always learning and still at the beginning of a long journey. So take everything that I say with a grain of salt, and do your own research. That said, I think doing that research and collecting experiences in this space can be super rewarding. The two of us have spoken about personal finances before, and how empowering it can be to realize at which point you have to work less or don't have to work at all in order to still be able to support your daily and annual needs via passive income or other income sources. And DeFi stands for decentralized finance, and it's something that's become possible on blockchain-based infrastructure like Ethereum. There's smart contracts that mimic or facilitate certain actions that in the traditional world were done by banks or other intermediaries. And what the D part in DeFi, the decentralization, has done is take out those middlemen and made it a lot more efficient. It's also made it more equal in the sense that if you wanted to do market making for any pair, let's say you wanted to market make for US dollar and Amazon shares, that's something that you as an individual can't really do in the traditional world unless you dedicate a serious amount of time and resources to it. In the decentralized world with automated market makers like Uniswap and lots of other protocols, that has become something that takes you 2 or 3 clicks. And I find it fascinating because it gives you a chance to not only study these concepts in theory, what does market making mean and how does it work, but it enables you to actually try them out with just, depending on the platform that you go to, but I'd say with a few $1,000s, you can try it out and get an idea of what kind of returns can you generate and what are the things that you want to pay attention to. So long, maybe background, coming back to your question, why would you want to get started and how would you get involved? The why I think I covered now, because I find it very exciting. There is income opportunities that don't really exist in the traditional world. And how to get started, I'll probably say just start reading a bit, dedicate like a couple of weekends to reading up on what DeFi protocols are out there. And then there's certain ones that are easier to use than others. So there are kind of one-click solutions like Yearn or Idle Finance or Pickle Finance, where you go and there's different, they call it vaults, or yeah, I think the term that they use most often is vaults. We have certain strategies. So let's say you have some USDC, which is the US dollar stablecoin. And then there might be a vault that takes USDC and does something pretty complicated in the background. And that's usually described what kind of strategies they run. But instead of having to go through all the steps of that strategy, you can just deposit your money into that vault and someone else or an algorithm will take care of running all those steps and generate yield for you. So I'll stop here, but that's one idea to get started is to just try some of these like aggregators and basically vault yield platforms.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to talk about the options that I can choose from there in a second. I also want, usually in the beginning, you do have to make the decision about, should I go the DeFi way? Should I go the traditional ETF stock way that we also discussed in the personal finance live Q&A session that we did a while back? What's your take on that? Why should I go for the DeFi way instead of the traditional ETF stocks?
So I think the context within which we talked about ETFs is like, I have a large portion of my net worth and I want to invest it. How do I invest it so that the trade-off between security and stability and yield is a good one? And I would say if you're going to go and put the majority of your net worth somewhere, then that's a very good strategy to look at and work with. DeFi is a bit more experimental. I mean, one fact or like one thing that reminds me of that is that 18 months ago, most of this has not existed at all. There was no way for you to invest in DeFi back then. And that also and comparing that to ETFs, which have existed for, 20 years plus, you might know better than I do, but like for many, many years, like magnitudes longer. So that's something that you should take into account. I'd say go and play with DeFi if you are intellectually curious, if you're interested in how these protocols work and what they can do in terms of yield, but also what the risks are. I would say the amount of education that you need in order to generate yield on DeFi is much higher than it is for traditional finance with ETFs. But it's also more rewarding, both intellectually to me, as well as financially can be a lot more rewarding.
In what way? Like usually you say you can get 6 to 8% annual return with an ETF on the worldwide diversified stock market. So I know it highly varies, but what's like a good yield or a realistic yield to aim for with DeFi investments?
I think it's roughly double that. So I'd say like 12 to 15% is probably what you can get with simpler strategies. Maybe that's one thing as well. I feel ETFs are a bit more set and forget type of strategies.
Yeah,
Actually, you don't even look at them and you don't even think about like when to sell and when to buy.
Yeah.
With DeFi, I would say you definitely want to keep an eye on it, what it's doing. It's not that you need to check in every day, but it's definitely an area where you want to maybe check in twice a month and readjust your strategies based on what you learn. Because it might be that a pool or a vault that gives you 12% right now, 2 weeks from now only gives you 6% because the environment has changed. And then you might be faced with the question of either just sticking to that and looking for the annual yield, average yield, or if you're a bit more adventurous, maybe see if there's another pool with a similar asset that fulfills your needs as well and try that out.
In that regard, where does the higher yield come from? Is it just because not that many people are active in that space yet? So you share the yields with less people, and as soon as more people come in, the yields will go down? Or is it also way more risky and therefore you basically get rewarded for the higher risk that you take?
So I'm probably not going to get a perfect answer here, because that's actually something that it's a very good question and something that I should probably think about a bit more, but I'll try to give an answer off the top of my head. DeFi yield comes from different sources. One is just liquidity is worth something, and in the decentralized space, a bit more so than in the traditional space, just because you don't have negative interest rates and just money can be turned over a lot more quickly. Not sure if that's a good phrasing, but so I'll put that in like the first bucket. Second, there are yields, as I said in the intro, that just don't exist in a traditional world for the average Joe. For example, market making, being an LP in a pool on, for example, Uniswap, it's not something that you have an equivalent to in the traditional world, and so those yields, they're not exorbitant, but they're just fair. Often they're fair yields for what you're providing, which is you're taking impermanent loss and you're getting as a risk, and you're providing liquidity for this protocol and the people that want to trade against your pair. Third, and now it gets a bit more maybe exotic, some of the protocols also try to get you interested in them and try to get you want to incentivize you to hold a position or to provide liquidity for them. And instead of just the normal trading fees or liquidity fees that you would get, you might also get some incentives on top of that, where protocol XYZ decides that if you are a liquidity provider in the period from A to B, then you get a certain amount of XYZ tokens on top of anything else that you already get through what you're doing. And then maybe fourth, last but definitely not least, the crypto space is a very volatile space. So there's lots of movements up and down, and those typically correlate with movements in where the liquidity goes or what assets people want to hold. So if Ethereum and Bitcoin, the two biggest currencies, appreciate in value, a lot of people want to hold those, but once they start falling, then a lot of people switch into stable coins, and that might have an impact on different vaults. So a lot of people might choose to hold USDC when the prices are falling and thus deposit that into the same pool. And so you have to share the yield with more people than before.
Yeah, got it. I think that's a good overview for people, getting into the topic. You also mentioned the vault and that there are different strategies. So besides just buying and holding cryptocurrencies, what else can I actually do with potential coins that I hold? There are many terms like staking, lending, liquidity mining that you also briefly mentioned. So what are the options that I can choose from, and what are they in detail?
Yeah, so I feel like there's a whole universe out there, and we've probably uncovered, I don't know, less than 20% at the moment. But some of what you've mentioned, I'll give a bit more detail on those. Staking typically refers to depositing a coin or locking it up for a certain amount of time, and you are rewarded for that. The protocol might say, it's good for us if people don't trade this coin right now. It's good if they hold it, and we are willing to reward them for holding the coin for, let's say, 3 months, 6 months, or a year. So that's what staking is typically referred to. It might serve an additional purpose rather than just reducing liquidity or selling the amount of coins that are being sold. For example, with Ethereum staking, or with the internet computer, Definity, staking is part of what makes the system secure and kind of powers the consensus mechanism. And by the way, this is in regards to Ethereum 2.0 is what I'm referring to, not the proof of work, but the proof of stake mechanism that they're implementing. Second, lending, very interesting. I know you've experimented with peer-to-peer loans in the traditional world before.
Yeah, I got the bloody nose there.
Yeah, don't let that discourage you from trying more. I think both in the traditional world as well as in the decentralized world, there seems to be a huge appetite for lending and borrowing. It's not something that I personally experienced as some. I've rarely taken out loans. The first time I started doing so is with Liquidity. That's one of our portfolio companies that offers interest-free loans, and I mean it's pretty cool, right? In DeFi now you have the option to take out an interest-free loan, a collateralized loan, but still it's interest-free. So with Liquidity, you can deposit your Ether, take out a stable coin, LUSD, against it, and then you can turn that LUSD into actual dollars and go and buy. I think an example I recently saw is someone that bought a Tesla. And so basically they didn't want to sell their Ether because they think the price will further appreciate. So what they did is just deposit it as collateral, take a stable coin out and buy their car with that loan. And at some point in the future, they can just pay it back, especially when they've seen that Ether appreciated more like it did this year. It's easy for them to pay the loan back and still have all the upside. And borrowing and lending is a huge area. Third, liquidity provisioning. In centralized exchanges, either the exchange sometimes gets involved in this, but then there's also centralized market makers. Those are typically firms that help reduce the spread, meaning the amount between bid and ask prices that you currently see, and they're paid a fee for that, or they have an interest in the token being more liquid themselves because they hold a position. Might be many reasons. Now, with decentralized exchanges, it's a bit more complicated. Well, at first, it was a bit more complicated because you don't have that order book mechanism. But then what they invented instead is that everyone can become a market maker by just depositing an equal dollar amount of 2 tokens to a so-called pool. And then people can trade against that. So they can come and take out, to go with the example from before, they can take out ETH and deposit LUSD in return. And if I'm willing to provide that service, I am paid trading fees as well as sometimes other upsides like we talked about before.
Amazing. Now, I want to also walk us through a specific example. So let's say you have 5,000 Swiss francs that you want to invest or that you want to play around with in the DeFi space. What would you do with that money? What strategy or what option from the ones mentioned just before would you actually select?
So I would probably, even though I would go with Ethereum in terms of the platform, because Ethereum has the biggest network of applications and it has the longest track record, so to say. The reason why I'm hesitating is that gas fees are pretty high. So if you're going to invest just $5,000 and the gas fees might easily cost you $150 to $200 to make to get into a DeFi protocol, that means you first have to make a couple. $200 out of 5,000 would be like 0.4%. Is that right?
Yeah, 4%.
4%. Yeah. So it might take you quite some time to just make back the gas fees. So maybe maybe disregard my answer and go with Binance instead. So Binance Smart Chain is a chain that supports a lot of it has the same execution environment as Ethereum. And so there's a lot of similar applications. It might not be called the same. So for example, instead of using Uniswap, it's PancakeSwap on Binance. If you want to provide liquidity, I actually can't recall one of those vaults off the top of my head that run on Binance, but I'm sure maybe someone can put it in the comment if someone's watching and has insights, or we can Google it later on. But
yeah, sure.
What I would do is take the $5,000, turn it into Binance US dollars, which is the stable coin that Binance provides, and then work with that inside their environment, because the fees are much lower, and so they're not going to impact your returns as much. And then maybe, I mean, if you feel curious, then split that amount up by 3 and do a bit of liquidity provisioning. Use the Binance Earn program. And third, put some in a vault, like we mentioned, and then see how those 3 strategies feel and what you learn, and where you want to move from there.
With that setup, would you also expect this 12 to 16% annual return on average, or what sort of yield would you expect from such a strategy?
Yeah, roughly.
Okay.
I haven't checked rates too recently, but roughly somewhere in that ballpark. Maybe a bit more conservative, like maybe 8 to 12 could also work. If you're not, like, you can easily optimize by layering some of these techniques on top of each other, but I'm not sure that's what you want to start with. So maybe a bit lower.
Yeah, got it. So there are a few questions coming in. First one from Christian. I really like the question here. Shouldn't the prices of cryptocurrencies be a bit more stable in order to be used seriously as a means of payment? I think that's the never-ending discussion. Is the cryptocurrency or Bitcoin often referred to, is it a means of payment or is it a store of value? So what do you think about that question? Thank you for sending it over, Christian.
I don't think, I mean, there's no reason why Bitcoin should be stable, right? There's no counter value that has a stable value. That's why I think Bitcoin and Ethereum are always going to be fluctuating and always going to be volatile. But there are cryptocurrencies that are designed to be stable, like USDC, USDT, Binance US dollar that I mentioned before. That said, I mean, there's even a crypto Swiss franc. That said, some of these stable coins, they might be impacted by a regulatory change in the future, or some findings that they are not fully backed. So USDT is infamous for not being 100% transparent, and things not being clear on like how much money there actually is to back the circulating supply of USDT. But that said, to answer this question, I think there's different assets like there are in the traditional world. So we expect the US dollar and the Swiss franc to be relatively stable, even though that's also not been the case the last 20 years, right? But at least more stable than things like the Tesla share price. And so I think you want to look at it in different categories. There's like share-like assets on the blockchain, which I would compare to project tokens. So if you buy the LQTY token, the Liquidity token, that gives you a share in the revenues that Liquidity generates in the future. Then there's commodities, something like Bitcoin, where only 21 million are ever going to exist, at least the current protocol design. And so that's more likely like gold or oil, like finite resources in the traditional world. And then there's also payment or currency like tokens like USDC and USDT that are designed to be more stable.
Nice. We also got another question from Birgit. Sorry, due to privacy reasons, it's not showing up your name here. She basically asks, for those new to the DeFi world, is there any simulation environment for testing themselves and probably also their hypothesis before they actually start investing? Is there something like that? And I would also ask the follow-up question, would you recommend using something like that instead of putting like a few dollars into the testing yourself?
Yeah, very good question. On Ethereum, there are test nets, I think 7 or 8 of them. And you can get you can go to a so-called faucet and get a dose of test ETH, so to say. So if you are switching, by the way, for a lot of these applications, you will need MetaMask, which is an in-browser wallet that allows you to put in a private key, and then it generates the necessary credentials so you can interact with those protocols. And if you switch your MetaMask to one of the test nets and you get some test ETH, and then you exchange that for whatever token or coin you need in order to try those applications, a lot of them will have something deployed on the testnet as well, not all of them. So you can try all of them, and for certain use cases like liquidity provision, I'm not sure how good of or realistic of a result you will get on a testnet where no real money is involved. But in terms of like learning the steps and figuring out how this all feels and the tools that you need, that's one way to go about it.
Yeah, I think that's a good recommendation, because I also realized when I did that myself for the first time, it can be a bit more complicated than you're used to or than you imagine. So it's actually good to get a bit familiar with the environment that you are walking around in, basically.
Yeah, and there's not really anyone you can call, right? Typically, there's no number or support page where you can just chat with someone. Typically, we'll go to forums and figure out if someone can help you if you run into a problem. So yeah, definitely different, and the user experience is going to be vastly different 2 years from now, I'm sure. It's just this of where we stand right now that things are a bit buggy, and there is a bit of an entry barrier in terms of experience.
And I mean, that's also what basically gives you access to the higher returns for now. So I think, it's pretty simple. That also makes that available. So on a different topic, something that we often read in the news or also hear from other people around is not only the getting rich quick schemes to, hey, I bought a cryptocurrency and then exploded and I got super rich, but also the other side where people really lose a lot of money or even get scammed. So my question here is, how can you actually differentiate legitimate projects from potential scams?
I think just recently so 2 examples come to mind. One that went well, at least till now, and one that didn't go well. There's this Netflix show called Squid Game. And after that came out and became a sensation, someone created a squid token. And I think it originally sold for something like 50 cents, and then it went up to several $100s, if not even thousands of dollars. And then at some point, and by the way, this is just here, I mean, what I've briefly read by scanning through some news headlines, but what happened is that the people behind this project decided to just sell all their stake, and in the process, they drove down the price from like $2,000 down to like 2 cents or 0.2 cents even. And so everyone that still holds the currency now and potentially bought in at like several dollars worth of value per token, up all the way up to those several $100s per token, they're going to be sitting on huge losses. On the other hand, you have a coin like Shiba Inu. It's another dog token after Dogecoin. And that project currently, if you believe the market, is currently worth probably north of like $20 billion. Without any, at least to me, seemingly no real counter value. So I think that to me is a tale and a reminder that it can go either way. You will never have full transparency. This is an unregulated space. And so you always got to figure out like what you are willing to risk in order to get what kind of returns. I personally stay away from, I hold very, very few tokens, and all the tokens that I hold have been around for years and years. And I bought them because I believe in the team and I believe in the tech. It's not because I think I can make money holding them or speculating that the price will appreciate. What we talked about before, this the DeFi yield opportunities, you will find them mostly in the more established chains like Binance Smart Chain, Ethereum, and probably 3 or 4 more. So if you are speculating, I think just be smart about it, diversify your risk, do your research, and don't bet or speculate with more money than you could lose.
Yeah, very important reminder in that regard. So I also wonder, what do you currently personally invest in? What's your strategy in the DeFi space?
So the answer to that is twofold. One is, I mean, I still invest through Tomahawk, and some of those investments I hold personally into upcoming DeFi applications. So right now it's not announced yet, but we're investing in an options protocol. We're also investing in a fixed yield protocol. So those are some of the projects that, when I said I think we've seen less than 20% of the whole universe, I'm actively trying to get people to build more coverage of that universe and bring more of the puzzle pieces to life. Where I invest in order to generate yield it's pretty simple. I'm an LP on some stablecoin pools on Curve, and then I'm also invested in a few vaults on Yearn and Idle Finance. And then I'm experimenting with other strategies like a cash and carry trade, where you hold the underlying and you sell the future from time to time. But so far it's not been my focus. I've done it just mostly for curiosity, not for financial gain. But that's most likely going to change in the near future as we're exploring to set up another investment vehicle for that. But I can't share too much on that yet. But as a summary, I would say I'm very excited about this space and the opportunities it gives, and I'm excited about giving access to people that don't want to do all the research and want to trust someone to do that research for them.
New investment vehicle, that already screams for a next live Q&A session very soon.
Yeah.
I have one last question on that space. What are some common mistakes that you see people making, or maybe even something that you yourself regret from your DeFi journey? Is there anything that you recommend or that you sort of have as a tip to people to avoid?
So this was not a mistake necessarily, but it's more of my principle is, if I can't explain why it's generating yield, then it's probably not sustainable. So just because it's generated yield in the past, if I can't figure out why those yields are possible, then it's probably not something sustainable. I'm not saying it's going to be a scam, but it might just be marketing efforts that are going to run out at some point. And so one mechanism one principle that does well for me is to kind of separate research and execution, or to challenge my research before I execute. So what I do is, like, if I get excited about an idea, I share it with friends and colleagues, and I have them challenge the trade that I'm going to make. And sometimes they can talk me out of it, or at least they bring up some good points. And other times it just feels good because I feel the real way to know if you've understood something is if you can explain it to someone else. And so I try to follow that principle with all the investments I make in the DeFi world. So that definitely be one. The second one is gas fees can be pretty vicious on Ethereum. So, and it's hard to foresee how much they are going to be until you actually make the trade. And if it's a one-click kind of investment, you can always see that. But if it's a multi-layered investment where, for example, you're going to also insure against smart contract risk, it's hard to foresee all those steps and understand how much this is going to cost you in gas fees. And that's something that I would probably that I've learned to study more before I actually make a trade, to get an idea of, like, how much are the gas fees going to eat into my profit in this strategy.
Yeah, I guess that's easy to forget when you see the yields, and then you still have to pay the gas fees that are still unknown, that can really eat up your potential profits.
Yeah.
Great, Cedric. So thank you. Yeah.
I think it's a fundamental design flaw in Ethereum, right? That you pay gas fees with a volatile token, that as the network becomes more valuable and finds more followers and people that are excited about it, that the gas fees directly scale with that. Because I feel a lot of the strategies now have become exclusive to people that have a lot of money, just because of that, the gas fee expenses that you need to set off against your returns. And that's one of the things that I'm really excited. So I spend a lot of time working with internet computer teams, Definity, these days. And I think that's one of the most ingenious design decisions that Definity has made, is that the way you pay fees on Definity is via a stable coin. So a token that's always going to have the same value in dollars. You can exchange the volatile token, ICP, for cycles. That's the stable coin at the current daily rate. And that ensures that making a transaction, even if the ICP token decides to, or appreciates in value or depreciates in value, storing the same amount of data or executing the same amount of executions on the internet computer is always going to cost the same dollar amount. And so I think that's going to create a much more fair and equal environment for DeFi applications.
Yeah, sounds like a very good development. So Cédric, as the last part, we have, as always, some rapid fire questions for you. So we start with the simple one, right? Summer in Thailand or Switzerland or somewhere else?
Well, I'd say both, because you can kind of spend the Swiss winter here in summer and then also have summer in Switzerland. But I love spring in Switzerland. Summer sometimes gets a bit too warm. I don't think we're going to come back to Thailand anytime soon after this, because there's so many more places to explore. But well, I guess I should shut up because it's rapid fire. So.
All good, all good. Then if you had to make a choice, USDC or USDT?
Definitely USDC for me.
Why?
Just I trust them more.
Yeah. ETH or also Ethereum or Bitcoin?
I mean, I was a hardcore Ethereum guy at the beginning. Now I hold both, and I think it makes sense to have both because they serve different purposes.
Fair point. And if you had to describe the future of crypto in one word, what would you choose?
Exciting. Very exciting.
Yeah, that's an easy one for you. Cool. Hey, Cédric, it's always really a lot of fun and a pleasure to talking to you. I hope you enjoy the rest of your time in Thailand, and looking forward to hitting the gym with you when you get back here. I'm sure we have some catch up to do.
Anytime. Thanks so much for having me, and we'll chat soon.
Thank you so much. Have a great weekend, everyone, and take care.